Welcome to Leading with Curiosity. Command and control leadership is dead. We interview leaders, entrepreneurs, and executive coaches challenging old paradigms and fostering cutting-edge leadership. Here's your host, certified executive coach, Nate Leslie.
Welcome, listeners. My guest today is challenging the status quo defining high-performance culture. Once the embodiment of an aggressive athlete, Jason Dorland used to identify himself according to the results of his competitions, winner or loser. The elite rower was raised with an in-it-to-win-it attitude and was trained to think of every competitor as the enemy. It took a devastating loss at the 1988 Olympic Games to shatter his destructive way of thinking, and it took the advice of Olympic middle distance runner Robyn Meagher, who would later become Jason's wife, to help him reshape his views on what it truly means to win, both in sport and in life. Today, we're going to explore Jason's understanding of high-performance culture and his work in the leadership development space. Jason, welcome to Leading with Curiosity.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Nate. Appreciate you having me along. So thank you.
I want to mention to you that a reminder, you and I met 4 or 5 years ago. We were guests on a panel at Glenn Mulcahy's coaching seminar in Vancouver, and you invited me to a Roy Group event at Kananaskis Resort, which in these COVID times, I imagine doing an offsite in person one of these days again at a place just like that.
Yes.
I just want to share with you that, all these years later, I'm now a learning lead with the Roy Group, and I owe that invitation and that introduction to you, the work you were doing for the Roy Group at the time, to a lot of my journey. And I'm just really honored to be able to let you know that today and introduce you in this way.
Cool. Well, thank you. And I'm, as I always say, I just trust the way our paths go, and I'm super glad that it all connected and worked out for you. So that's great.
Right on. Thank you. Let's start, for listeners, with your story, because those of us in sport have our ups and downs, and yours is compelling, and it's led you on a journey that's really important to you. Go for it.
Yeah, it's always interesting listening to that introduction, because even in the introduction, our mind's eye being what it is, wow, some of the images are, well, they're still very much alive, and yeah, it was quite a trip. I mean, as a young athlete, very much attracted to rowing because of the challenge. I loved the physical, mental, and emotional challenges of rowing as a young man. But, when Canada won that Olympic gold medal in 1984, and my high school coach was the coach of that crew, my focus, my goals shifted, right? They got bigger. And I sort of had this moment of, well, if those guys can do it, then why can't I? And I was about 4 years younger than the majority of the guys in that crew. And so for the next 4 years, I trained as hard as I could anyhow. And lo and behold, in the spring of that year, I made the Canadian men's 8, along with some of the returning members of that 84 Olympic gold crew. And then in September of that year, we flew off to Seoul, Korea as defending Olympic champions. And over the course of that regatta, got into the Olympic final, and then finished DFL in that final. And, much was made of that, certainly in the media, because it certainly wasn't expected either, by us or by the powers that be back home. And yeah, as a 25-year-old kid, and I was a kid, when you live your life as an elite athlete, it's a pretty sheltered life. And so yeah. I really wasn't, I was sure physically very mature as a big fella, but emotionally not very mature. And so seeing a picture of myself on the front page of the Globe and Mail with Canadians bomb out in Seoul as the headline, that was a moment, right? And so began a very long, and I don't want to be dramatic, but it was an uncomfortable, painful, maybe journey of shame, and really having to come to understand why losing in that final was such a devastating moment, right? I mean, people lose in Olympic finals all the time, but not everybody gets kicked on their ass the way I did, and as I was to learn later, a number of my crewmates did, but we just never talked about it. So, but it's interesting. I look back on it now, that loss as being one of the greatest gifts of my life, because losing on the world stage really forced me down a path of self-discovery, and really having to dig into why losing was such a created such a visceral reaction, right? What was it about that? And no surprise, at the end of the day, it came down to ego, and my ego could not handle the idea of someone being better than me, and it was a rough journey. And so digging into that and coming out the other side and realizing that my reason for rowing, my reason for going to the Olympics were toxic, and a very dangerous fuel, right? That's I think if I could go back again, I certainly would have done things differently. But that's the way life plays out. And in the end, like I say, it was a gift, because if we had won in that Olympic final, if we had done what we were expected to do, it would have just reaffirmed for me that my approach to life, the chase model, the combative model, the kill and win at any cost model, was the right model because it worked. And as I've said before, goodness, I wouldn't want to know the 56-year-old version of that guy, because he was an ass. And so because of that change, I like who I am today, right? And I certainly wouldn't have married Robyn, and I wouldn't have done all the things that I've done. I just can't imagine what that life would have been. So
when you just described the motivations for going, I think about all of the amateur and pro athletes who dream of that getting to the Olympics, we would think, is the ultimate goal, and that wasn't. Maybe it was, and then you got there, and then the pressures of winning and following up in 84.
Right.
Gold was the ultimate goal, and anything less was failure. Yet the country's watching, and most of us, no matter how much pressure we put on you, I was 11, so go easy on me.
Okay.
Most of us would have just done anything just to be there, but just being there wasn't good enough, right?
Right.
I think almost daily about the work that we did together in your time with me at Kananaskis about intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, and the extrinsic being the reward and recognition.
Sure.
I'm sensing that was part of that's connected to that ego of why you were going, was that reward and recognition. Just want to expand on that model a little bit for our listeners.
You bet. I think, that is the model for so many athletes, right? Yeah. We are taught from a very young age that when we become high achievers, our self-worth is celebrated a heck of a lot more than if we don't. And so I was, as a young athlete, because of my size and strength, I suppose, I did some interesting things, or unusual things in sport, and it garnered praise, and I liked that praise. I felt valued. I felt seen by the adults in my life, and so I wanted more, and I wanted more, and I wanted more, and I figured, my young thinking was, as is so many athletes, if I can just win that Olympic gold medal, that will be it, right? I will be fixed. I will be valued for the rest of my life, but it never works that way. The research even tells us that, when Olympic gold medalists wake up the next morning, they have this horrible epiphany of, wow, I'm the same person, and that Olympic gold medal hasn't done what I thought it might. And that's a reckoning.
Well, you brought a friend to Kananaskis who won gold. And had a similar had that crash of emotion and a tough uphill out of that, even
Right.
after winning. What's worse, winning in the Olympics or losing?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I think there could be some fascinating research on that. I mean, look at Michael Phelps' movie, The Weight of Gold, right? I mean, that attempts to delve into that. With Michael, 18 Olympic gold medals and still a crash. And so what are we to argue that 19 would have been enough?
Yeah.
So I think he is the poster child for that experience. The notion that when we achieve what we think we need to achieve, what we imagine to be on the other side of that is never there. And when we can have that realization earlier, when we can correct course earlier, and that's the kind of the work we do now through coaching, is that to try and turn on that intrinsic drive to perform, that intrinsic celebration of just getting better and enjoying this experience of self-discovery and realizing, holy crap, I can do some pretty cool stuff. And when I do that cool stuff, sometimes I win, and that's fun too, but it doesn't define me, right?
How am I doing after all these years of that model? I've made this a way of being, or a foundational principle, that intrinsic motivator. The way I say it is service and mastery. Service, the pure joy of being a part of something greater than just yourself, and mastery, the pure joy of getting better at something.
You bet. Those are innate experiences, right? We are born hardwired to have that fire off a positive experience. And so as coaches, when we can help turn on those experiences, we ignite a part of those athletes that is far more powerful and sustainable than if we just dangle carrots in front of their noses all the time.
That connects to every listener. We're using athletes as a practical example that suddenly become a metaphor too, right? But it's the adult who's in a leadership role who also is a very beginner guitar player and can get the joy and satisfaction from learning their favorite song, or whatever the hobby is. Your buckets just get filled with those intrinsic motivators versus a one sport athlete who's just been great at one thing, and the improvement is so micro compared to a novice diving in headfirst to something and getting really good at it.
Yeah.
Or someone who's stuck in their work, or whatever the case may be, right? Those extra things can just fill that intrinsic side of us. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I use our daughter as an example. When she was a young girl learning how to play the piano, it was some painful moments in the house of just this repetitive and miss hits and flat notes and what have you.
Yeah.
But once in a while, when she would nail it, and we'd hear this little scream of elation, and she didn't get up and walk away from the piano, right? She dug in harder and more, because the thrill of figuring it out, that notion of mastery, was such an attraction that she wanted to do it more. And so as leaders, as coaches, as business owners, as whatever, as parents, when we can allow people that self-discovery of, wow, it just feels cool to get better at something.
I'm also reminded, Jason, of the time we spent together. That friend of yours, we were a room full of strangers, and you in your authentic self were able to articulate how tough that was on you and how it's been instrumental in your journey. But I remember he goes, hey, rewind that. We were watching your race, and he goes, rewind that. And we talked about the winner. He says, guess who won that? And you remembered, I think, the German's name.
Yep.
Who a few months later, if I remember the story correctly, it sure makes for a good one, passed away due to health issues likely related to everything that we're talking about, anorexia.
Correct.
Or
it was
something
a few
like
years
that.
later. It was the stroke of that German boat, right? And he, same deal, right? I think sometimes with athletes you can become OCD, and I certainly fell into that in my retirement. Food became a problem, and I became quite obsessive about weight control and weight loss, and so did this German and eventually starved himself to death. And that's the shitty part of this, right? Is that sometimes life can grab hold and make it really hard to get out, to elude that grasp. So, and when I learned that, I was just in fact, I gave a talk a couple of years ago at an event in Victoria, and I was sharing that, and whoa, it just came. I got super choked up, and I had to pause for a moment, because it just brings up so many memories of what I was struggling with in my retirement, and I'm just grateful that I was able to get out of that. And unfortunately, this young man wasn't.
Yeah. Wow. Let's start building back up here to your message of love and commitment, and the message that you share with organizations in sport and in real life, as we get to call it.
Sure.
Where's it led you?
Yeah. Wow. So many unexpected places. I mean, even this, Nate, if someone had come up to me after our Olympic final and sort of tapped me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, it's all good, Jace. Someday this race is going to be the source of your work, and, rock on." And I would have plowed the guy in the face. There's just no doubt. Right. And, but here we are, and life can be like that sometimes. But the work we do now is really about understanding that what I embraced as a young man, the notion of chase, the notion of I'll be better when, is that's a dangerous place, right? And it can lead you to some uncomfortable moments. And so I think what we try to do is invite people to understand, or to appreciate that, maybe, although it does work, and I would never argue that it doesn't. I mean, it got me into an Olympic final. But there are many parts to that are broken, right? That don't tick all of the boxes of motivation, of fulfillment. And so I use that story as a way, as I did with, you guys on that day, that, careful what you wish for, right? It's, it isn't always, as Bruiser pointed out in his story, right? It isn't always what the movies portray. And so the work now is really about embracing that holistic journey, that process-centered journey, where it comes from our soul. It comes from a place of being centered and understanding what the goal is, for sure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to win, but realizing that when you set the sights beyond that outcome and make it about something bigger, the winning sort of comes along as a byproduct. So it no longer becomes the focus. It becomes what happens when you just engage in getting better at your craft.
I feel like you're taking the NHL coach's cliche of it's about the process, and it's a season long, and you're saying, hang on, it really is about the process.
Right.
Cliches are cliches for a reason. There's a lot at stake here. It's about the process, and the winning is awesome, and it's just a piece of it. You're like bringing a cliche to life, would you say?
Yeah, no doubt. And, interestingly enough, you talk about hockey. I'll admit I'm a Leafs fan, right? I was born and raised in Southern Ontario, sorry. And so last night, Montreal and Toronto were playing. There's a goalie in net for Toronto. He's just set he's gone 10 games undefeated. He set an NHL record, and now he's going for his 11th game, or maybe this is his 12th. And he has a horrible game. And the commentators are saying, wow, there's something up with him tonight because he's just off. And sure enough, in the post interviews, he says, I got in my own way tonight. I got focused on trying to win that game. And I just thought, wow, that's beautiful. Like what an incredible amount of awareness there to be able to, in the post-game interview, be able to look back and go, you know what? I created my own interferences tonight. It's not like I forgot how to be a good goalie. I let the story of winning another game and setting a bigger record interfere with my ability to actually show up and be a good goalie. And that is such a perfect example of a metaphor for life, right? We often create our own interferences, and those cliches that you talk about process. It's not enough to know, Nate. Like, it's not enough to say, yeah, it's about process. Mm-hmm. You have to be the process. You have to engage in that daily and come back to the practices of what that process actually looks like.
Performance equals potential minus interference.
You betcha.
Case in point.
You betcha.
Goalie last night.
Yeah, well, Tim Gallwey nailed it, right? I mean, he did. He nailed it. He's the grandfather of what we're talking about here, the notion of mental and emotional, that component in performance. It's not enough to just to train and improve your skills and get stronger. I mean, those are integral parts of high performance, but it's managing those interferences, and invariably we are the source of those interferences. The stories we create, the emotional weight we put on what winning is, all of it shows up and comes back and bites us in the ass. So.
For the listeners, Tim Gallwey, I will put in the show notes in the blog post a link to his book, The Inner Game, and there's that amazing YouTube video from the 70s of Tim Gallwey, who's a grandfather of a pioneer in leadership and executive coaching and holding people capable of figuring stuff out on their own.
You bet.
Teaching middle-aged people who had never played tennis before to teach them tennis in about half an hour. For those listeners who are intrigued by that notion of what's standing in the way, you know, gosh, we might as well give them some credit for that great coaching question right now. What's standing in the way of between where you are now and where you want to be? There's stuff in there. You're going to go over it, around it, blow it out, ignore it, pretend it's not there. What are you going to do, right?
Yeah. And I mean, for us, we would, our message, if you will, is to get acquainted with it, right?
Nice.
To work with it. There's no, there's no blowing through it. There's no around it, because it'll always come back, right? You can pretend it's not there, but invariably it'll get louder. It'll just scream for more attention. And so when we acknowledge whatever it is that is causing the interference and we work with it, we find that's the most effective way to diffuse that interference.
Yeah. The most liberating thing, you know, when I was, say, 30, getting into really committing to some sort of yoga practice, just letting yourself be aware of, in practical terms, how the left leg feels versus the right leg, and forgive yourself for it, right? Again, it's not just enough to use it as a cliche. It is the thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember one time saying to Robyn when she was on me about not meditating, and I said, look, I don't have enough time to meditate right now. And and I just sort of caught myself and went, oh, okay, what's that expression? If you don't have time to meditate, you should be meditating twice as much. Right. So but sometimes we have to sort of come to that place on our own and just realize, okay, that's ridiculous. Yeah. There is time, and I clearly need to make some.
Mm-hmm. Who pushes back the hardest against your work? What's an example where this message is arms crossed?
Yeah, well, those are my favorite participants, to be quite honest. I mean, when I meet those people, I'm sort of meeting myself. I'm meeting that young 20-year-old who was bitter and angry and hell-bent on an Olympic gold medal. And so, yeah, those are the guys that push back. But like I said, they're my favorite participants because I understand them. I get it. I know why they're pushing back. I often joke that if I was sitting at the back of the room in one of our workshops, and believe me, I would be sitting at the back, I would have left halfway through the day when we start talking about love and intrinsic motivation and working synergistically with your competition. That would have just been too much. I just would have said, this is ridiculous. And and I have no connection with any of this, and I'm leaving, right? So I know how my younger self would have received our message. And so when I meet those people, first of all, I have a tremendous amount of understanding for them, and therefore some compassion. You know, there's no judgment. I mean, I get it. I get it. It's a different approach, and it challenges a lot of what we are taught as young people. So I always find it kind of fun.
The competitor in you maybe gets a tiny bit of joy out of
You
seeing
know,
the arms unfold.
that's a great question. And I would say for sure there is some ego in that goes, that at the end of the day goes, that was awesome, and I played a part in that. So for sure there's some self-satisfaction, but playing, you know, so I used the term invite earlier, and it has to be invitation, right?
Yeah.
There's no way we can get up at the front and lecture and push and preach and tell. Like, we don't like to be told what to do. And so you have to lay it out as an invitation. Look, if you want to try this on, this is what it looks like. And this is what it could result in, but it's got to come from you. And so, you know, I'm not attached to it. I don't get invested so much that I want them to change because I can say that I made them change. I know that that's not a good strategy, but yeah, sure. When those people become our biggest advocates at the end of the day, yeah, that's a cool moment. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. And you're doing important work for the world, and those who benefit the most are sometimes those standing furthest from it in the beginning. Preaching to the choir is fun too.
Yes.
And so is helping people see a new way of thinking about what's in front of them.
Right.
If, as we move towards wrapping this up, Jason, just feel free to share a little bit about, you know, how your work works, an ideal setup. Who do you work with? What does an experience with you and Robyn look like?
Right. Well, as much as we do enjoy those, you know, the pushback, and I welcome it. I do. I sort of, when there's one or two of those people in the room, it almost helps the process, right? Because there are some hard and tough questions, and I think that just helps the dialogue. You're right. It's lovely to have the choir in there, but it's great to have somebody challenge it and say, you know, I'm not so sure I buy into this. But, you know, the type of organizations invariably are progressive organizations that are trying to do more than just fulfill the bottom line. They're trying to take care of their people and contribute to the greater good in terms of having a business, for example, that does more than just provide a service or make stuff. They're trying to provide employment and make a difference in the world. And okay, fair enough. That might sound a little you know, sort of flaky, or I don't know what you might make that mean, but they're out there, right? Those businesses are out there, and those leaders are out there too, like, because we meet them and we hear from them, who are intrigued by a message that isn't just about the bottom line. But, you know, of course, the paradox being that when they take care of their employees, when they utilize the work that we bring to the table, invariably the bottom line gets taken care of, and then some, right? And that is, of course, the great mind shift that has to happen, or that invariably happens.
I love the air. Well, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, just to say, it's, you know, a lot of it's education. We work with a lot of schools. We work with corporate, but invariably they're, you know, I love that expression, little giants. They're companies that are big enough, but they're not too big that they can still maneuver and have and create culture that is a fun place to be a part of, right? People want to be a part of a culture that is about more than just putting services or products in people's hands. We do some government, and we do nonprofits. So those are sort of and we have worked with some professional teams, but I mean, Nate, you'll understand this perhaps more than anybody. You know, that's a little more uphill, especially in the professional ranks. And, you know, that's a drag, but ego is such an ingrained part of performance, right? And that old school approach is still alive and well. I mean, it's changing, but it's still very much the status quo.
Alive and well, and the status quo, and it's, I don't know if ironic, we misuse the word ironic all the time, but that we use sport as the metaphor for this stuff, for high performance culture, and sport often needs it the most. What the heck, right? Yeah. I've talked to leaders in companies who have reinforced what you just said, in that purchasing power is driving this change too. Organizations are saying our customers want it. Our customers want to know that this is a great place to work.
Right.
And that's a new era, I think, for us.
Yeah. And I think also we're seeing it in athletes too. You're seeing coaches being let go because of trying to utilize old practices on young athletes that are coming up and who expect and know something different. My generation, because I said so, was a valid answer, right? And so it was, oh goodness, sorry for asking, and you're right, I'll never do that again. But now athletes, they want to know, well, why are we doing this? And they want to be involved. They want to have a voice. Yeah. And I don't see that as needy or meddling or none of your bit. Like, I see that as important. I see that as a huge opportunity for sport to transform. And so I think sport is slowly changing because athletes are demanding that coaches treat them with respect. And, part of why I was successful as a rowing coach is because I invited the athletes to the table as problem solvers. Mm-hmm. In my first iteration as a coach, top down, control, you bet. But when I finally figured it out, and I realized that the athletes were a resource, and if I were to allow them to be involved in the process of co-creating this crew, invariably we would be a faster crew. And that would mean, winning more races and more championships and on and on. So again, back to that paradox, right? When we think we are the top dog and we try to control our athletes and everything's the way I want it to be, and as I said so, invariably we create that interference that Tim Gallwey talks about, right? We get in our own way and we limit the ability of those teams to perform.
Jason, a perfect way to tie a bow around this.
There you go.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Leading with Curiosity. Please share, follow, and rate the show so that other leaders can make positive change in the world. Connect with Nate at nateleslie.ca. And remember, the brain behaves very differently when encouraged to think rather than told to listen.